Welcome to this webinar on combating trafficking in women and girls. This is the 7th in a series of webinars the Christian Conference of Asia has initiated since April this year. The theme and related issues we are going to discuss today are one of the most important issues CCA has been addressing during the past 5 years, more precisely within the broader framework and context of human trafficking or trafficking in persons. This particular webinar we are organizing, which focuses on the specific theme towards wider participation or partnership for combating trafficking in women and girls, which will be examining in the context of the current situation of the pandemic COVID-19. As we all know the fact that people across the world are still facing the impacts of this unprecedented health, humanitarian, and the economic crisis. The damage, the fragility of our systems and structures, as well as widening of the socio-economic divides, all are creating in various forms social insecurity in our societies and in our lives. As this trend continues, women and girls are among the most affected sectors as they share the brunt of the impacts of this ongoing crisis. We know that the impact of trafficking in women and girls this impact becomes an hidden scourge, and it leads to exploitation in various forms, including sex trafficking. In Asia, we know in many of our contexts and situations, this crime is not reported properly or prosecuted or detected in adequate ways. As a result of this, many of these victims who fall through cracks becoming further entangled in a murky web of exploitation in their day-to-day situations. So, in other words, we can say that this serious crime is brewing in many Asian countries during the time of the pandemic crisis. Many of these women are suffering or fleeing from their difficult circumstances back home, mainly because of poverty or conflicts. So it is a reality that in Asia, or Asia is struggling with an uphill battle to eliminate or combat trafficking in women and girls because of various reasons which we will be analyzing and discussing in due course. So the current COVID-19 pandemic is making the situation worse given the increased financial strain it has placed on families during the global lockdown. As countries prioritizing or they prioritize as limiting the spread of the virus and recovering from the economic fallouts, then victims of sex trafficking will become more invisible. This is what our experiences in several of the Asian countries. Here the question is, can Asia save its women and girls from trafficking? And can Asia save its next generation from sex trafficking? How to combat effectively this growing menace affecting us in our day-to-day life? Do the Asian governments have the political will to abolish trafficking in their own local situations? Then do the law enforcement agencies or mechanisms in different countries, do they have the capacity to combat trafficking in persons with adequate skills? Or do they have sufficient knowledge and the resources to effectively deal with this particular problem? how can the civil society and also the faith-based organization can initiate, collaborate, and network with governments, multilateral organizations in order to be more effective and to be involved in effective advocacy to combat the trafficking in women and girls. So we need to ask these pertinent questions today during our discussions. CCA provides this platform to discuss some of these most pertinent questions and issues of our time. Friends, I welcome each and every one of you to this webinar. We have with us 6 panelists who will be facilitating today's session. And the moderator of this session is Reverend Tana from New Zealand, who is the Vice Moderator of the Christian Conference of Asia. We have with us panelists Ms. Gail Demolis, UN Women Asia Pacific Regional Headquarters, Ms. Peppi Siddiqui, International Organization for Migration, Ms. Bandana Patnaik, Global Alliance Against Trafficking of Women, Ms. Rupa Pradhan Chetri, Mukti Network from Nepal, Reverend Sol Villalon from the United Methodist Church in the Philippines, and Reverend Dr. Linje Haranje Pelu from the Communion of Churches in Indonesia. On behalf of the Christian Conference of Asia and on behalf of my colleagues, I welcome the panelists, the moderator, and all those who have registered as participants of this webinar through Zoom platform, as well as many others who have expressed their desire to watch this event through live stream platforms. I welcome all of you to this webinar. Thank you, moderator.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And a special greeting to Jennifer Dawson, who joins us also from Aotearoa, from the Anglican Church. Thank you, Doctor, for your introductory remarks towards wider partnerships for combating trafficking in women and girls amidst COVID-19, and also special thanks for introducing the panelists. My task this evening, and I'll say this evening because it's evening here in Aotearoa, is to moderate the sessions. There are 5 segments for us, and each panelist has four minutes. It doesn't appear to be very much time to allocate to each of our esteemed panelists to be discussing such an important topic as this. However, it is a start. Now, let me introduce segment 1. We'll get right into it now because I want to give our panelists as much time as possible. In this segment 1, the impact of COVID-19 on trafficking in persons, an overview and current trends. And we have 3 panelists, Ms. Gail Demolis, Ms. Peppi Siddiqui, and Ms. Bandana Patnaik. I'd like to introduce Ms. Gail Demolis to speak to us. Trafficking in persons or human trafficking, noting operates in a hidden way which cannot be traced at the beginning in most situations. And this trend has been increasing, especially during this pandemic. In the context of how COVID-19 has impacted trafficking in persons, what are the emerging trends in the increasing levels of trafficking in persons? How far has the nature and vicious circles of operating changed, intensified the trafficking of persons under the pandemic?
One of the issues that UN Women highlighted from the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak is that, as we know, governments throughout Asia and elsewhere in the world responded to COVID-19 by providing security-focused response. Government enacted emergency powers. We saw suddenly hundreds and thousands of police officers, of military officers deployed in the streets, airports, and communities. They were implementing the checkpoints, enforcing the lockdowns, as well as physical distancing. And particularly relevant to this topic of trafficking, police and immigration officers were tasked with screening signs of COVID at the border, taking away their attention from detecting trafficking cases. And who are these police officers? According to UN Women, UNODC, and Interpol research that we just launched last month, the proportion of women in law enforcement in ASEAN countries ranges from 6% in Indonesia to 20% in Laos. And the study found that it's even less women that are deployed in remote areas, which means, in other words, that if we go to border locations where we can actually screen or see cases of trafficking, there are even less women law enforcement officers. And needless to say that women law enforcement officers play a very crucial role in detecting cases, because they are the one who can perform the body search of women. They are the one who can also take the complaint from the women and can listen in and also detect cases of trafficking in women and girls. So on one hand, we have male-dominated law enforcement who are given additional tasks related to COVID that may take their attention away from trafficking. And on the other hand, we have lockdowns which closed the economy, and many individuals working abroad found themselves without any income. And they rushed to cross the border in the region. Others were forced to leave their towns of origin to search for any type of work opportunity, and as they lost their income. So COVID-19 pandemic certainly exacerbated the vulnerabilities of potential victims of trafficking. And we see a lot of people who would be desperate to earn any type of money. So it's not surprising to see that a number of Southeast Asian countries reported increasing trafficking of women and girls, including, for instance, authorities in Myanmar, who have said that they noted an increase of trafficking for the purpose of forced marriage and to foreign nationals. And finally, one point I wanted to mention is that during the lockdown, men and women, I think, spent much more time in front of their screens on their computers. And what we've seen is an escalation of the use of ICT to recruit and exploit women and girls, including by advertising employment opportunities that end up in being exploitation schemes, often sexual in nature. So this is in short the elements that I wanted to share with you as an introduction. Thank you.
This is a very important issue now, and we see it only getting worse. So first, I want to talk a little bit about what we've seen happening in Asia due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and how we use this word unprecedented a lot, but how this was really unprecedented in terms of human mobility. I mean, we saw migration flows and people crossing borders in numbers that haven't really seen in this region, perhaps since the partition of the subcontinent. Whether it was in India, from migrants flowing back from the urban centers to the rural areas in hundreds of thousands, or what we saw in the Mekong, Greater Mekong region, from Thailand to Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. Many migrants made it home, but at what cost? During those journeys, they were perilous. There were many situations that put already vulnerable people at a greater risk. But also we see many stranded migrants still at the countries of destination, often without employment anymore, in increasingly vulnerable situations, unable to return home, which puts them in a very perilous situation when we think about trafficking and exploitation. So really, the COVID-19 pandemic has created sort of a perfect storm for exploitation and trafficking when we look at migrants and vulnerable migrants in particular, and you know, women and children often come into this category. And I don't just want to talk about irregular migrants in this case, because often a journey that may have started as regular migration can move into the irregular space and then also into trafficking. And this is a sort of a one continuum, and I think we have to look at it from the beginning to the end. And I think it is also important that we recognize that labor migration, labor exploitation is a very considerable source of trafficking also for women and children in this region. So we shouldn't just talk about sex trafficking when we talk about women and children. And again, you know, labor exploitation can start as labor exploitation, but easily in this context and in this region, one thing leads to another. And so really a holistic approach is necessary. So a little bit more about what we saw over the past 6 months, to also for us to think about where the services are needed and where we really have to target our attention. This sudden repatriation and deportation of migrants really stopped many who were already vulnerable from seeking services where otherwise they might have had access to existing referral pathways and services. So there where we saw trafficking victims who could clearly identify as trafficking victims, but who were just pushed across the border, so they were not able to, you know, seek justice, go into the actual criminal justice mechanisms that otherwise would have been available. Also, there were many cases of unpaid wages. And so people returning home without months of wages that were owed to them, and that would put them into an increasingly vulnerable situation now at home. What's also increasing, we did a perception survey in Myanmar of the returned migrants there. And already now, when the borders are still closed, 60% are saying they are waiting for that opportunity to migrate again. And depending a little bit on how long it will take for these borders to open, you know, a lot of these people who are very keen to go out again and continue earning are likely to take riskier journeys to be able to get to the countries of their chosen destination. And at the same time, to what jobs? We're seeing an economic recession globally. And so the jobs that these migrants were used to perhaps knowing that they're waiting for them and have access to are no longer there. And so upon reaching the countries of destination, they may end up in a very vulnerable situation. The other area that we see putting people at risk is the uncoordinated opening and closing of borders, because it's very hard now in this region to know which country is putting what measures in place to allow migration. It's difficult to access regular migration pathways. And so what we expect to see is this sort of asymmetrical access to information, particularly for migrants who are not always very literal, will increasingly drive them to seek support from agents, from sub-agents, which is a known pathway to trafficking. So even people, even, you know, that we know that we're looking for regular migration opportunities are using now agents that will lead them towards exploitation and trafficking. And that's a real risk. And so we have to think about how do we make sure that that information is available to all of those who have expressed a wish to migrate, to know which countries are open, where are their job opportunities. You know, the information to the communities has always been crucial, but I think now it's especially important. We also see this marginalization and xenophobia happening in many of the countries of destination, where foreigners are seen as spreaders of COVID, where they're seen as problematic. You know, we see, for example, we had a survey amongst the Rohingya in Malaysia who say that, you know, seeking services has become exponentially difficult now because they are really seen as the other and are not readily assisted. And so I think that's, again, something that we have to address, because there are many very vulnerable migrants needing this support, but who do not feel confident turning to the authorities because they feel that they are being marginalized as foreigners. The lockdown measures and the mobility restrictions we saw putting women in particular in very vulnerable situations, because the majority of them work in domestic settings. And when you're no longer able to leave your house or the house that you work in, it really cuts off a major avenue towards seeking assistance from external sources. And so this is something that we really have to think, and, you know, Gael mentioned that increasing numbers of women are also turning to social media and looking at, you know, other avenues. So that's also where the services need to go to be able to show that we can reach some of these populations who are not able to move. But also victim identification is now challenging. I mean, we saw in Thailand, for example, last year the government identified 1,800 victims of trafficking. This year they've identified fewer than 200. Of course, the year is not over, but the chances are that there are now going to be many more identified over the next couple of months. And so we really see that capacity of the frontline workers who usually are in the front line of identifying trafficking victims are perhaps not able to go out the same way. And so we have to look at really mainstreaming identification beyond your usual workforce to others as well. And then finally, we've seen a strong push of trafficking moving online, and this is particularly sex trafficking. And you know, Philippines is a great point where we've seen a threefold increase in online sex trafficking of children, where we really have to look at different ways of addressing that again, because often these are the communities and the families who are involved in this as well, are desperate for ways to support themselves, and you know, exploitation can become the norm. And how do we then reach out? How do we train the frontline workers to understand that online is now where we have to be looking for these victims?
So I mean, my two co-panelists have already brought up some very important issues, and I agree with them. So instead of repeating what they have said, I would like to look at this world of work and try to address the questions posed to me. So what we are seeing basically is the unraveling of the new neoliberal economic paradigm. Something that critics of the extractivist growth and development model have been telling us for quite some time now is there for everyone to see now. Talking about precarity is widespread at this moment. A large number of people everywhere in the world are in precarious employments. Exploitation is no longer an exception. It has, if we just start counting from the adoption of the Palermo Protocol, for example, this is the 20th anniversary. So what we were seeing 20 years ago, I think the degree of exploitation, precarity, and abuse has become much stronger. In fact, I would say that exploitation is no longer exceptional. So only the degrees vary. Lack of public services and social safety nets have a cascading impact on everybody's lives. Sometimes, in fact, sadly, women's employment is generated because of the precarity. So let's look at the vicious chain of precarity, particularly the two aspects that you have pointed out in the question. I'd like to look at one, perhaps, or two sectors that employs a large number of women: domestic work, and if time permits, perhaps garment sector work. So low middle class and middle class families in Asia, I'm not talking about the wealthy, and these middle class and low middle class families whose financial security is dependent on salaries, they may not have a job security. They are salaried people, but they might be in very shaky private sector jobs or in contractual positions in a government, in a public sector job. This is very widespread all across Asia and outside Asia as well. And because of increasing privatization of education and healthcare and no state support for the elderly or children, these families employ a domestic worker or caregiver. And so this situation actually creates a job for another person in a far more precarious situation. So the woman of the house, in this case, I'm talking about the employer, tries her best to cut costs. She takes up a job or starts a small business of her own, like a little beauty parlor from home, as we see in many parts of India, for example, or Bangladesh and Nepal, or making some snacks to sell it. So, and her domestic worker is underpaid and overworked, and the employers don't have the money to employ a full-time domestic worker. So the working woman, this is the employer, puts in more care work. And if we look at the statistics of care work, unpaid care work, we will know that women do 2 to 10 times more work than men in households. So, so this is the scenario that we're talking about. And this is the scenario, this is the workplace for certain groups of women. And this could be, and the employer's place could be a household that had actually left the village a generation ago and had sold their land and completely dependent on salaries, very small salaries in most cases. And the domestic worker, if we move our focus to the domestic worker finds work in a number of households. She has no money to send her children to school. Her husband does not have a job often, or temporary jobs. They don't have money to meet the expenses of healthcare. Violence becomes the daily experiences of across these scenarios. And these people also must be a household that had left their village, that has left their village in the countryside and come to the city in search of work. And so similar and very slightly different links can be seen in the garment sector as well. Traditionally a formal sector, it has undergone a high degree of informality over the last several years. Export-oriented garment sectors are the norm right now. And what we see is the state training young women, primarily from poor, sometimes from indigenous families, and sending them on temporary work contracts with very low wages. So therefore, yes, there is a very strong link between lack of formal employment or shrinking of the public sector employment and susceptibility to trafficking and exploitation. And we might not be seeing the classic trafficking stories here, that is someone being cheated or duped and then coerced, but what we are seeing is more and more contract violations, dodgy contracts, dysfunctional recruitment systems, workplace abuse that is sometimes woven into the arrangement actually, and very little or no workers' education and organizing. So what has COVID-19 done to these workers? Job loss, wide, huge levels of job loss. I mean, the bulk of job loss is massive. Overwork at home, and those who still have work, overwork at work as well. Delayed payment, no payment, and those who have more work at workplaces, many of them have been forced to work without protective gears. And as we all know, violence and abuse against women during this period has gone up multifold. And the places which were like caregiving places, many have shut down. They were shut down during the, the serious lockdown periods. Some are now opening up. So that is the impact that we see right now.
Basically, it's very true that the border of Nepal and India is the worst scenario over here because we don't have the boundaries. It's open border and we don't need visas or passport to cross the border. And that is the advantage that the traffickers have got in Nepal and also in India to recruit the people from here to India and also from here to India to sell the girls and our women. So this has been the continuous struggle for over many, many years. I think before I was born. This has been going on since 1960s. The girls from Nepal had been trafficked to India and they were forced and they were taken. But now they're not forced. Now they groom over here and then they cross border now and then so that the people in the border would not doubt that they are the traffickers because they cross the borders to buy some resources which is cheaper than Nepal. They just cross over, they buy something, materials, and they come back. And also their families are working there. So whenever they are intercepted in the border, there is no doubt that they have all the documents, fake documents, saying that we are visiting our families or we are visiting the nearest hospital because we don't have the facilities in the border. And because of the open, porous borders, people cannot stop them, though there are border force officers, but they could not stop because they have fake documents, they have medical documents where they say that they're going for treatment. And also they go to and fro. So they keep saying that we are visiting our family members. So that had been an issue. And then during pandemic time, especially during lockdown, this has become one of the greatest issue in Nepal because our people are mostly focused, as one of our panelists was saying, that they're more focused on doing the checkup or doing the quarantine of the people who are coming back from India. So, and the influx of number of people that came from India was so much that their focus shifted towards those people on checking their virus, whether they have COVID or not, whether they have to go for quarantine. So that gave an opportunity for the others to take the girls or women or boys across Indian border. And recently what happened, the tactics that these people have followed was they started contacting all those people who have come back, who were rescued from India and has come back to Nepal and who were integrated in their own community. As because of the pandemic, they didn't have any jobs, they didn't have any income coming. So the trafficker took advantage of that. They started contacting those people and they started sending money as a relief work. As a relief, they started sending money. And for that money, they thought it's a very good thing. This guy had come when I was in India, either in dance bar or in brothels. And this guy really takes care of me. He has sent me the money. So that lover boy kind of technique they have followed. And they started taking those people back to India. They walked because they can walk and cross the border. And they've gone to India. And what happened? Now they're trapped. They're trapped because the traffickers are telling them that I have paid so much money for your relief work I've given to your family members. So now you need to serve what I asked you to do. So though they are not officially in the brothels or anything, but they are being used in the private houses to entertain the people. And because of lockdown, it is very difficult to trace because everybody is inside the house. So these people cross over and they are exploited in many ways. So that has been, and the pandemic has really killed so many people. So now what happened? Not only just cross borders, but they are just crossing even from one place to another inside Nepal Valley. And some of the students who are locked inside lockdowns, whose parents are in the villages, who are sitting in the city, they cannot pay the rent. They're not being able to pay the rent because their parents in the villages have no money to pay the rent. And they have been working and studying in colleges in Kathmandu. So these people have become very vulnerable and they are being exploited. They're being asked to. And there was recently one case where I got a call from one particular girl who stays in one of the particular city in Nepal. She called me and she said, it's better to do this work once and wear a mask because I'm getting some money to buy food and pay the rent rather than hearing all the nonsense of the landlords. So there is no choice, but it's being taken advantage by the traffickers, by the exploiters for those young girls and boys who are away from their families because they have no job, they have no money to buy food, they have no money to pay rent because Kathmandu is also very expensive and some of the cities are very expensive. So, and they have lost their jobs. So that has been a situation right now. And some of the boys, young boys, are luring some of the young girls who are staying alone in the city. And the online exploitation has begun now. Now the new trends of trafficking in Nepal is not just taking them out, but the technology, because the online education, the school system, now the parents cannot afford to buy four Android phones for the 4 children, but they have to study online because the classes are all happening online. So what are the traffickers doing? What are the pimps doing? They're buying phones, they're buying laptops for all these people, and then they're opening an account for all these people. And through online, these children are also getting exploited. Not only the children, and not only the young girls, but even the boys. So they are having online exploitation. So that is the new trend that the traffickers are using now to exploit the children and grooming them. And then they are being taken from one place to another place by luring that they will get a job. So they are taking any kind of job possible, and that's how they are being exploited in Nepal. So this has been the greatest, disadvantage of the pandemic. We already suffered from earthquake. 2015, when we had an earthquake, there were a lot of children who were taken in the name of village, taken from the village to India and were sold. 400% it was increased. So now because of pandemic, you can imagine what will happen to our country. So that is another challenge. It's scary because people are losing jobs. They have no money. They have no money even to buy one one per meal also. And people are taking advantage of that. In the name of relief work, the girls and the boys are being exploited and lured and taken, and they have crossed the border. When the border was loosened, that was the time when they took advantage of the grooming time, and they've taken many people. And recently, some of them were rescued, but many are trapped in the border because of the lockdown. So that is the situation of Nepal. Thank you.
The Philippines is the global epicenter of online sexual exploitation of children. Images and videos of naked, sexualized, and abused Filipino children are being uploaded, shared, and sold online. The number of victims continue to increase. 8 in 10 victims of OSEC are minors. IJM has recorded a 2-month-old baby as the youngest victim. Online exploitation of children, or OSEC, is a growing threat in the Philippines. As the world becomes more connected over the web, there are those who use the internet as a medium to force children to do unspeakable acts in front of cameras. Over 70% of Filipino OSEC victims are forced into this industry by family or neighbors, and these children are robbed of their childhood and dignity. However, Filipino churches have united to fight to end OSEC. We have organized the 3 big church bodies: the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, the National Council of the Churches in the Philippines, and the Council of Evangelical Churches in the Philippines, to form the Interfaith Movement Against Human Trafficking. During the first 3 months of lockdowns due to COVID-19 pandemic, there was 300% increase of OSEC cases in the country. The number could rise after 6 months of lockdown, where children are not allowed to go out of their homes. Public schools will open next week, October 5. Online classes will be implemented, and more children will be exposed to the internet. We fear more children will be victimized by criminals if parents and guardians will not be cautioned and given proper orientation. Most NGOs now in the Philippines are alarmed of the social media hashtag Drop Your Beautiful Daughter Challenge, where pictures of young children are posted in Facebook that give strangers a way of easily saving the pictures. NCCP has just sponsored a 2-session webinar on OSEC last Tuesday and Wednesday yesterday, and one of the resource persons shared why the Philippines is the epicenter of OSEC today. Filipino children are ideal targets of sexual predators lurking online. What makes Filipino children ideal targets? Number 1 is widespread poverty. Number 2, the cheap internet and smartphones. Ability to speak English well. Even small children can speak English. OSEC as means of family income, and lack of proper parental or guardian supervision. So the challenge in tackling OSEC now, this is our opportunity to strengthen our Christian education program, to remind us of God's image in children, in women, and all people. This is also our opportunity to empower children to speak out. Children's rights must be popularized among children and adults, parents, teachers, in homes and in schools and in public square. This is also the Kairos moment for us to give orientation about OSEC in churches and plan programs on how to stop and eliminate OSEC. Use the webinar, especially this time of pandemic, and other venues to raise awareness about OSEC. This is also our opportunity to empower parents and guardians of children, especially whose parents are migrants abroad, by sponsoring education sessions on OSEC, including the appropriate and responsible use of internet. This is also to reiterate our prophetic ministry. This is our opportunity to reiterate our prophetic ministry to address the issue of poverty and social injustice in the Philippines and in other countries with the same problem. During this pandemic, we realize the need for sustainable agriculture. A lot of people now are planting vegetables, etc., flowers, no? We realize the need for sustainable agriculture, the importance of equitable land distribution, the prioritization of improving healthcare systems, the government neglect of its citizens working as overseas workers. A lot of women and men, no, even seafarers, returned home because of this pandemic, and some of them have became positive with COVID-19. Labor export is not the solution to poverty of the Filipinos. We are number 4 sending country of migrants, of Filipino migrants. Labor export is not the solution, but creation of jobs at home, improving the industry of our country. The challenge is so big. OSEC is a manifestation of an ailing government. Churches must engage, continue to engage governments to do its mandate, to serve the people. Thank you.
Indonesian have done a number of actions taken in response to human trafficking, sexual exploitation, and also labor exploitation. However, some challenges are obvious and apparently present in our Indonesian context. So I'm going to answer this, observe this question from 3 point of view. First one, regarding the law enforcement concerns. In this concern, there are still some challenging in enforcement of law enforcement process due to the inconsistency and implementation of human trafficking laws, which cause some degree of so-called confound tasks and responsibilities between law enforcement institution and government in local and also in national level. And meanwhile, the local government seems to be less committed to replicating and to elevate the best practices of the community participation in effort to prevent criminal acts of human trafficking, sex exploitation, and also labor exploitation. In addition, there is a lack of integrated database from related law enforcement institutions. And I would add in this part that based on migrant care report, that Indonesia has been categorized in tier 3, which means that the country, Indonesian country, is so-called worst situation in terms of human trafficking and labor exploitation. Country that doesn't have an educated legal instrument to prevent and making law enforcement work towards human trafficking. And the second challenge I will see from the government point of view, it seems that the grand design of human trafficking prevention strategy has not been compiled by the responsibility stakeholders. Yeah, Indonesian government and other stakeholders relating to this issue. And I see from other perspective that also from government perspective that an optimized treatment provided by government for the repatriated human trafficking victims, where they are not fully accompanied by during the time of restoration in physical or psychological wounds, as well as fulfilling the rights as the victims. Another factor is the implementation of Memorandum of Understanding between government of region of origin and the transit region, and also the destination country. And has not fully progressed due to minimal coordination, commitment, and also budgeting. And I think this is perhaps one of the consequences that bring unclear task division related to funding between ministries, so-called Ministry of Social Ministry and Health Ministry and other ministry, and also between local and national government. And from the government point of view, another point of view is the lack of coordination and collaboration to prevent and to eliminate human trafficking syndicates. And the third perspective I will see from migrant workers' eyes. Human trafficking victims are most likely to be re-trafficked upon their return, mostly because they don't have a permanent and decent jobs, and also they are in the debt trap from the previous labor agencies. This situation will be worsened since patriarchy culture still persists in Indonesian society that perceive women and children as a commodity that easily to be trafficked even though against their will. Now, in response to increasing cases in human trafficking, Indonesia government actually has established so-called Human Trafficking Task Force, whose main task is to manage a campaign against human trafficking through mass media or social media, and to spread information related to placement and protection for migrant workers to the target grassroots communities. They are also responsible to facilitating shelters and raising awareness in areas that are prone to human trafficking cases. However, due to the COVID-19 outbreak, most funds, resources, attention have been reallocated and diverted to handling COVID-19 cases that result in handling social and humanitarian activities and other COVID-related aid. Besides the social and physical distancing, social mobility has limited, if not stopped, the efforts of rescuing human trafficking victims. But another fact that happens still in our region, especially among our churches, Christian churches in Timor, during COVID-19 outbreak, it seems that a stable of tend to increase number in mortuary rates among the migrant workers, especially those who originally come from our province. In fact, that up to September, this September or last month, we have received more than 70 bodies of migrant workers. It's very sad condition here. And I have talked with one person in charge from House of Hope of Kemit, mentioned that they have to accompany this body and the family, even pick up the body from the airport and bring back to the village, no matter cases. Even though they are banned for people to mobilize between places, and some red zone happen in our places, but they will take any risk to do so. In some cases, we have witnessed about the reverse migration during COVID-19 outbreak. But in this case, the reverse migration for us is a dead body. Is a dead body. Reverse migration in the cargo. What a irony. And this is my side for answer this second segment.
The organization that I work with is a secretariat of a membership and partnership-based alliance. So while the organization, our office, we coordinate action and we work on research, advocacy, and things like that. Our members and partners in different parts of the world work on the ground, working with victims of trafficking and with migrant workers, and some broadly work with women workers and women in the community. So what we have been seeing over the last 6 or 7 months is, for particularly those who provide assistance to victims who are identified as trafficked or identified trafficked victims, counseling had to be moved and done online. So online counseling, as much as possible, that has been done by many organizations who run shelter homes or counseling services, because even within the same city, movement is restricted, if not completely stopped. Our colleagues who run shelter homes have struggled and kept the shelter homes running. And our job at our end, we have tried as much as possible to, negotiating with donor organizations and making some financial support, additional financial support available. As my colleague from the IOM was saying, the identification, the official identification systems have been affected, and the number of identified victims of trafficking have gone down. She's sharing the data here in Thailand, in other countries, similar stories. Yet, this is when the civil society organizations have stepped up their services and tried to keep their eyes and ears open, and have, without waiting for official identification, they have tried to provide support as much as possible. There are also organizations who have provided relief and done some negotiation, again, face-to-face negotiation, telephone negotiations with employers to provide salaries, because in most cases, the law enforcement or the justice system was not working or temporarily kind of closed, or the services were running at a minimum. What has been very, very encouraging in these responses, I would say, is the citizens' initiatives in many places. Those of us who work on the issue of trafficking are very used to seeing the base side of human beings, the horrible side of human beings, the traffickers, the perpetrators. What this situation has actually brought to us and creates hope in us is also to see the best side of human beings. Citizens who do not run services as such or do not run NGOs have come forward in large numbers in many places across Asia and across the world, I would say, and provided services, work, and relief as much as possible. So that has been very encouraging. Talking about the immediate and long-term challenges, I think the immediate challenge is, everybody has talked about it. Job loss has happened, and unfortunately, all the projections point at a situation where the challenges will continue. So it's a horrible situation, and continued unemployment, and obviously sadly, continued violence, and in some places, in fact, stark reality of hunger is staring at us. Long-term challenge is this is going to be a slow recovery, and so job loss will continue, and another sad development which will have long-term impact is during this time, some countries, some governments have passed legislation which are absolutely anti-people. And so, you know, I have in mind the farmers' bill in India, the increasing the labor codes in India, for example, and many other places where these sort of, you know, in order to try and address these issues, what governments have done, instead of trying, you know, instead of moving towards a welfare state, which is the need right now, what they have done is much more sort of private sector, the corporate friendly legislation has come up. So that those long-term impacts are staring at us. No, many of us are not fortunate to have someone like Jacinda Ardern in their country. So she's one leader who, among so many bad ones, is giving us some hope.
In response to human trafficking issue during COVID-19 pandemic, PGI in Indonesia has done number of actions, such as continuing of economic empowerment to ensure the alternative resources of income for the former migrant workers in some hotspot areas. This project has been undertaken in collaboration with other PGI church members, such as Gemit or other church in other island, Christian Church of Sumba, and some churches in Kalimantan, Sulawesi, North and South Sumatra. In this case, for example, Gemit, by support of the Mission 21 funding, a faith-based organization, has been developed a creative economic activities from local resources such as agriculture, virgin coconut oil making, and ceramic making, and also weaving. And other funding use is for the shelter. Here we call it House of Hope, the shelter for human trafficking and sexual exploitation or domestic violence shelter. Moreover, there has been a paralegal training for pastors and vicars in hotspot areas, and we also conducted workshop in effort to establishing women crisis center in some parts of Indonesia, such as in Sumba or in Maluku. For your information, among the PGI circle, there are 4 established women crisis center, such as in Pasundan Christian Church, in Karo Christian Church, in Simalungun Christian Protestant Church, and also in Sumba Christian Church. Well, dealing with immediately and long-term challenges, I think poverty has been the all-time rooted challenges in our country, as well as natural disaster and corruption and bribery. The sudden appearance of COVID-19 outbreak has deepened and worsened the poverty into the lowest level and made many people suffer from various economic difficulties, particularly in grassroots level. In the longer terms, the human trafficking practices I see is predicted to increase in number in various unreasonable methods like illegal recruitment, identity fraud, and also false documentation. Another challenge is there are many syndicates that have been working around underground to recruit migrant workers illegally. For example, in NTT context, in our province context, even though there are more than 75 illegal migrant workers recruitment agencies, they do not seem to be fully reliable. Some individuals often work illegally to smuggle people to the destination country using false documentation. Following the recent temporary ban for Indonesian residents entering some Asian countries like Malaysia, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Brunei, there has been rejection and tightening in selection of migrant workers due to the highest daily increase of COVID-19 cases in Indonesia. During this outbreak, number of migrant workers are forced to leave the destination country. However, in fact, Indonesia is the largest country source for migrant workers outside other Asian country mentioned earlier. And those countries are main destination country for Indonesian migrant workers. Despite all warning and ban, there is a supply for every demand. Local recruiters try to more harder to meet demands from neighboring country through illegal recruitment procedure. And I think during this COVID outbreak, the operations still going on out there, and it is still happen, even though the pandemic has affected many life of people.
So that I represent the Mukti Network is a group of organizations that are coming together. Mostly we come together and we pray together and we share our concerns, and also we share our like what we do, what organization is doing what, and see the gaps. And my office does the consultation. So my office, what we do is it's called Touring Consulting Private Limited. So what we do is we look at the gaps of different organizations that are fighting human trafficking. Since I was working with International Justice Mission in the past and coming back and study my country, then was trying to find out why human trafficking is happening, what is lacking in our different organizations. So how can we fill the gap? Because one cannot do everything, but when we all come together, we can make a difference. So that's what we thought. So right now in COVID-19 situation, the good thing that is happening is we have a webinars and different meetings that we started doing online where we are sharing our knowledge together. Because initially when there was no lockdown, when there was no pandemic, we had a training for different organization ourselves. But now since we all are in lockdown and we all are working from home, we thought why don't we take advantage and share our knowledge so that will benefit the organization where there are gaps. So we are sharing our knowledge. So we are sharing knowledge on legal, sharing knowledge in aftercare, and mostly first thing that we did was we started working on mental health, not only for our staff and the organization, different organizations working together, but mental health for the survivors. And also we try to connect with different organizations whose survivors are reintegrated in the community. So how they are doing, what they can do, what are the things that they need to look at, and what are the things that they need to be careful of, because the traffickers can lure them anytime. And the good news that has happened, because you cannot reach out, it's like social distance, so in Nepal it's very difficult to go to the villages because it takes 7 to 8 hours walk. You have to walk and go. But before the pandemic, we had gone to different churches, like it might come in a second the segment also. But so I got, if you can see me on the screen, few of you can see me on the screen, I have a salt in my hand. I have a packet of salt in my hand. So this is the example I used to use whenever I used to go to the village to talk about the human trafficking and talk about the role of the churches as a believer. We are called to be the salt of the earth. But what is the use of the salt when it is in the packet? It is useless. It will bring no taste to the community. It will bring no taste. And most of the time we are the salt, but we are in the packet. We are inside the church, right? And then what happens? We buy the packet of salt and we put in our small container. That also is useless because small containers is the small house group. Again, we go into the small house group of believers. We don't go to the community. But the pinch of salt, just the pinch, that means a small step. The pinch of salt is needed to cook. But again, it's useless if it's not stirred. So salt cannot say, I don't want to mix with potato, or I don't want to mix with onion. When it's put in the vessel where the vegetable is being cooked, it has to mix with onion, whatever we put there, so that it can bring taste to the whole vegetables. So we as a believer, we were so focused on evangelism that we forgot that we have a duty. We have to do something for our community. We have to stop human trafficking. We have to look at the vulnerable people. We have to I ever. So most of the time it happens. No, that is NGO's work. That is not our work. Our work is to go and pray. Our work is to go and evangelize. But no, even Jesus went to the crowd. He went to the crowd. So that's what I've given, and good news that has happened is the churches are taking initiative now during this pandemic time, where we cannot reach. Those people in the community are becoming the salt. They are going and reaching out to the people, trying to find out whether the girls are there or not, and they're giving information, they're collecting data, and also they're doing relief work from the offering that they have, because we don't need a big building. We ourselves is a church. So they realize that, and they are doing the relief work. They're reaching out and they're collecting funds. And now we are mostly what we are doing is, even in school and colleges, I taught them, put in a coin box. If you put 1 rupee a day, 1 rupee a day, you don't have to put a lot. If you're not drinking coffee today, put that money in a piggy bank. So that is what we have been telling them. So that will help. At the end of the year, we will have 365 rupees, and 365 from one person can bring a change in somebody's life. So that was the thing that we had taught, and it really helped, because now those monies can be used for the relief work that they want to do. Even my son, who's just 10 years old, he also used to collect like that. So that is what we have been doing. And now even counseling, since I'm a clinical psychologist by profession, so I started giving counseling not only to the girls survivors, because even the house parents are being traumatized, because they're locked down 24 hours. To look after the trauma children is not easy. So we started having a sections for the caregivers as well, the house parents as well. So we started doing that. And even to the survivors, we said, oh, why don't we teach them skills, communication skills, the social skills, interpersonal skills online, and do activities online. So we started doing that, and the survivors are enjoying. And those who are already reintegrated in the community, the survivors follow with them over the phone to tell them that, hey, in case if anything happens, we are there for you. We are there. Why don't you give us a call? So we started following up so that the traffickers don't call them. If the traffickers can call them to lure for a job, why can't we call them to show our love, to show our compassion? So continue to build that network. So that is what we are doing. And also to business, social freedom businesses, we are contacting with them, so that, whatever orders are coming, and those people who cannot pay the rent, why don't we combine together and do something? So if one organization giving job, the organization can give some rations to them, some organization can give something. So that is how we are collaborating, and also finding a way for sustainability, because earthquake has taught us, and also pandemic, people are having economic crisis, not just Nepal, everywhere, all over the world. So what can we do is, why don't you look at something that is sustainable? So I said, forget only about jewelry, because most of us are making only jewelries that can be sold abroad. But something that can be sold over here, why don't we train them? Sustainability. So one business which I want to share in the crowd, and maybe that will benefit you all also. So what I thought was, wow, we wear wedding dress, the white gown, and it looks beautiful, right? Everybody has a desire as a Christian to wear a white wedding gown. But after that, we just put it in a cupboard or in the shelf. And once a while, we say, oh, this was my wedding dress. By the time we want to wear, we have put on weight. So why don't we donate that to the homes? Because to buy wedding dresses of their choices. So if we can donate to children's homes in the name of that particular survivors, then that can be taken as a rent. So they can give on higher, and then money comes. So that is the business that we had encouraged over here, and they have started that business, and the girls are earning money. So that kind of system, that is one small example. So that is what we are doing. And we started reaching out to the schools and colleges, because they are exploited online. The parents are not there. So the students, what we say is webinar, and we give the very interesting topic, who's writing your love story, so that they are not lured by the so-called boyfriend. So we write, who's writing your love story, and then at the end we say, let God write your love story, and we share from our own life experience. So that is a topic, because that is a catching topic that invites the young people. And we are trying to build, and then we are trying to make mentorship. So one particular girl who is vulnerable will be mentored by someone, and that girl will be mentored by us. So So that is what we are doing. So that one we started doing. And in colleges also, where we started teaching online in colleges, we asked them to make presentations on sexual harassment, presentations on human trafficking, because when they do that, they study the subject. Once they study the subject, then they say, oh, it can happen to me also. It is not for that person. So that person was trying to contact me this way. So this is also one of the way of luring. So that gives an awareness. So in colleges, we started giving. And back to the communities, another topic that we started doing. And we started talking about is the money. So is the money making you slave, or are you the owner of the money? So we started teaching them. So those are the few things that we have been doing, and finding the right partners for the right. And the challenges, there is challenges. There are good news, but there is challenges. The challenge is they will lose job. Many people will be without job. Many people will have difficulties in finding a place where they can get scholarships or anything, especially the young people. They won't be able to pay their fees. That will be a challenge. But I'm not very scared of the challenges. If we all come together, we have a rich Father in heaven. And once He gives us wisdom, we can face the challenges, because I feel our God is a big God than the challenges that we face. But only thing is, we need not compete with one another, but we need to come together. If we compete, the enemy can break us. The enemy, if the traffickers for one girl to take from one destination, they combine, they join, even if they don't know each other, then why, who are fighting for the right cause, don't come together? So we shouldn't compete with organization, but we should come together, fill in the gaps, and then move forward. The challenges can be faced, and one fine day we can fight this horrible enemy in the name of our Lord. So thank you so much.
In terms of coordination and partnership, since 2018, UN Women partnered with UNODC. UNODC is the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes. So we produced manual for law enforcement officers in ASEAN so these manuals are for law enforcement to know how to handle cases of trafficking from a gender and victim-centered perspective. So throughout Southeast Asia, in particular in Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Myanmar, Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia, we've trained 300 law enforcement officers, and this is still ongoing. So that's one point of partnership. We also worked a lot at the community level with grassroots women organizations, in particular in Cambodia, Myanmar, and Thailand, to support women who are at risk of trafficking. And one of the elements that the grassroots women's organization appreciated was that we would support them also to provide economic empowerment to women. So it's not only awareness raising and trying to explain how they can migrate safely, which is very important, but also providing them with economic options for them if they want to stay in their hometown or in their city, that they can do it if that's their will. So for instance, in Myanmar, we worked with an organization called Hatoy, in Thailand, an organization called Center for Girls. If I can give you an example of what we've done and how the church play a very important role, we worked in Myanmar, in Kachin state, and the issue was that many women were tricked into going to China because they think that they would get a job in a phone factory. So they go to China, they are blindfolded, they arrive in a building and they realize that all the women there are pregnant. And so they realize that it's not a phone factory, but actually it's like a baby factory. They have to produce a baby for a Chinese man. And so these women, some of them were very clever, and they put a lot of money on their phone before they left, and they were able to call their local church back home in Myanmar, and the local church reached out to the police station, to the families, and the family managed to pay back, or to pay back the money that she invested in the local recruiter to be able to have her back in Myanmar. So that's through the church that this particular woman I work with was able to return to her country. But many of them were not able to come back until they got the baby. Then they come back and they are left with a lot of stigma in their community. So there is, as mentioned before, there is a need for counseling, for helping them with the trauma they've been through, but also vocational training. And we've given this to some of the women, vocational training and a small grant to support businesses for them to start up their businesses. So that's another type of partnership with grassroots women's organization. We also partner a lot with IOM because they are very active in the field and specifically on awareness raising campaigns at the community level. We also partnered with UNICEF. We've developed posters for to explain what is the role of law enforcement to protect women and children during health crises such as COVID-19. And UN Women is also part of a large program called Spotlight Initiative, ensuring a safe and fair migration for women migrant workers in ASEAN, which is also in partnership with UN Women and ILO. So it's not to say that we are always coordinated. There's a lot that we need to do, but I hope that we can build on each other's work and support each other in different ways. I personally think that one of the key is to have a good partnership between grassroots women's organizations, churches, and law enforcement agencies. We see how this is important in cases of trafficking. And I would be also very interested to know how we can work together on issues of combating ICT-enabled trafficking if other organizations are working on this issue.
And I think this was mentioned by one of the panelists earlier, that this crisis has also brought out the best in people, and we've seen some really, really positive examples. And I think, you know, there is something in a good crisis to break the fences that we're used to erecting and, you know, bring people from their silos and increase cooperation. And we've seen that certainly in this crisis as well. But I think on the advocacy side, it's really crucial that we continue, that we don't go back to business as usual as things ease up a bit and calm down. I think these partnerships and the partnerships throughout, from the government through the kind of UN international organizations to the grassroots organizations, it's so crucial that the information feeds up, but also back down again, and having this whole of society approach, because we're dealing with a very structural problem. You know, I mean, this stems from unemployment and weak social services, and unregulated mobility. We need better legal frameworks. There's a lot that needs addressing, and this problem is too big for anyone alone to go about it. There are quite a few existing frameworks within which we can cooperate, and I would really welcome further participation from research organizations, for example, in these coordination frameworks. Most countries will have a counter-trafficking task force in place, for example, that welcomes civil society participation. So it will be really, really important to continue to feed your understanding and examples through these networks, so that it's also heard by the UN agencies in country as well as the government participants. IOM is also promoting currently this UN migration network, which is going to be established in every single country where IOM is present, at least. And there is a specific forum there, again, for civil society. So really would welcome hearing more on trafficking issues through these networks. Because also, I mean, currently the UN is in a very good position negotiating these socioeconomic response plans with the various governments, which specifically looks at what needs to be prioritized for the next year in terms of programming, in terms of funding, to make sure that no one is left behind and that the most vulnerable are being captured in also the social services that the governments can offer. And often the voice of the mobile populations, the migrants, are not really heard here because they are not always in country and they're not always the focus when these kind of plans are being put in place. So having you there advocating for trafficking victims, for the most vulnerable, for the women and girls is crucial going ahead.
Globally, 500 million people are expected to be pushed into poverty by the economic fallout of the pandemic. And 400 million jobs have already been lost, and ILO estimates that more than 430 million small enterprises are at risk. And paradoxically, if we look at one of the Oxfam reports, which came out in September, 32 of the world's largest companies stand to see their profits jump by $109 billion more in 2020. And the top 100 stock market winners have added more than 3 trillion to their market value since the pandemic. So that's what we're looking at. So therefore, if we come from this reality to this, to what we are facing, what we are talking about today, nothing less than a system change is needed. It's absolutely, and it's a huge task, but that's nothing less than that will do. So unless we change our course, economic inequality will increase, and as a result, exploitation and trafficking will increase, and we will go on doing the same band-aid kind of effort. I'm not dismissing our work, we are part of the community, but I'm really frustrated and very worried at this sort of thing. So what is it that we can do? I think the first thing that is needed is a shift in our analysis. We need to remind, we all know this, I'm not telling anything new, but we need to remind ourselves that trafficking is an outcome. It's a bad outcome, but it is an outcome that is the result of many things that are wrong in our governance systems and our development paradigm. And the current anti-trafficking model that we have was designed at least 20 years ago, when the level of abuse and exploitation was not as much as it is now. And the so-called 3R model that was designed, it was designed with the assumption that trafficking is an exception. It was not designed keeping 40 million people in mind, 40 million and counting. So we can't go on looking at this from a crime control as a story of, criminals after innocent people. We have to look at it as a systemic problem. So the next thing is we have to take an organizational decision. So different organizations work at different levels. If we see our work exclusively as providing assistance to those who have been identified as trafficked, then we would need to continue with that, because the need for direct assistance will not diminish, it will increase. And we've heard some really good examples and how much has been possible with how little. And so that's one aspect. Talking about advocacy, but for those colleagues whose area of engagement is much broader, and there are many, in fact, what is happening now is there are more and more anti-trafficking organizations who also work with workers, migrant and local, who are also women's rights activists, labor rights activists, and are concerned about the failed model about the dismantling of democratic institutions worldwide. So the plan of action then has to be much broader. One, mobilization of workers and of people who are worst affected by this model of development. And advocacy, unfortunately, as we generally understand it, that is holding states accountable to their human rights obligations, going to the UN spaces to hold states accountable, publishing a research report, critiquing legislation, and hoping that things would change. It hasn't been working for the last several years. Unfortunately, the states do not care for a globalized system anymore, an internationalism. UN, they look at UN, maybe UN will give us money. Maybe UN will give us this thing. So instead of funding from their core budget, funding the UN from the core budget, some powerful states are cutting connection with the UN. So that's the reality. So therefore, much stronger mobilization at the community level, assistance, support, yes, but also political mobilization. And keeping in mind that in some countries, it's impossible right now to critique the government. You will straight land up in jail. So you have to be strategic. We have to be strategic and innovative. And finally, our community work needs to get much stronger. Not the usual awareness raising that we do in the anti-trafficking community, but we really need to find out what is needed in the community and how we can try and achieve that together. It could be something small, like the Reverend from the Philippines was saying, sustainable agriculture, very small, but really, really, that's what we need to be connected with. and perhaps not a large model, but many, many small models, many, many small pockets. And that's how we will arrive at change. So I would conclude by saying this is the time to perhaps start small, but work and dream towards the big.
And in fact, trafficking has become kind of, like a modern thing. It has become like a fashion. Oh, I'm working against human trafficking. Oh, I do this. Oh, I rescue. When I see all those reports, sometimes I feel guilty as well, because I worked in a rescue team with International Justice Mission in India. So I see sometimes, we are again tearing their stories. Again, as an organization, writing the stories, raising funds. So the funds are also not equally distributed. So though the system is there, but even the NGOs and the people who are working against human trafficking should look at themselves. Are we giving justification? Are we doing? What are we doing? Are we going to continue to do this work if there's no funds available? Are we willing to keep the girls with us when there's no funds? Or are we willing to keep those girls who are traumatized and then they start misbehaving? Are we willing to tolerate them? Or are we, oh, I don't want this kind of girl. She troubles us so much. I cannot keep this girl. So let me send back to the community. Let me send her back to the family. If the family was safe, then she wouldn't be trafficked. After doing the study of the community from where the girls are being trafficked from, especially Nepal, the village itself is not safe. That's why there's aftercare home. So we need to have a very good aftercare home. Who is willing to keep the girls, who has a passion, not just a fashion, but a passion to keep the girls, even if they misbehave. Because the time will come, it will take time for the healing. They're very traumatized. So here I cannot do it, but when I used to do this kind of advocacy and awareness, and with my anger talk to the believers, I used to ask them to take out a paper. This is a plain paper where they can write their dreams. I'm sure everybody has a dream. You have a dream, I have a dream, everybody has a dream. So I asked them write, but then I become a very bad woman later on. I snatch their dream and I just do it. Similarly, our children, our brothers, our sisters, they had a dream. But what happened? The traffickers snatched their dream. They snatched their dream and their dream became like this. It's all crushed. So they're traumatized. We don't know what happened. It's very difficult for them to go through the healing process. And traffickers play with their mind. They play with their psychology. But it's our responsibility, it's our duty to accept them as they are. And then there are pain. It takes time for some, because for some, the papers are all torn. Their life is all turning into pieces. So we need to bring them together and help them to write their story again in a better way. But are we willing to do that? Or are we just focused? So the community has to be mobilized. Tell them the stories, the real stories, what happens, because some of the parents have sold their children, but not knowing what happens inside the brothels, not knowing what happens in the massage parlor, not knowing what happens in the dance bar. So, and the other thing is, whatever standard operating procedures we have to share that, so that we all have the same procedures. If we can do that, that will definitely have, it will. And one of the questions that I saw was, how can we create an awareness among the perpetrators? Very true, because there are few perpetrators over here who is being exploited as well. They didn't want to be perpetrators, but they also fall in the prey because they need a job. So what I do is, in awareness, when I go to the community, I tell them, the act means act and purpose. And also whose transportation. When that particular child or girl is rescued, they have to testify, they have to give. So they will be asked, who's the one who brought you from here to here, destination A to B? They will give the name. And you yourself unknowingly may be entrapped because you are being paid by somebody to take that girl and drop, without knowing that you are also playing the role of a trafficker. And then also, for how long will they be imprisoned? So giving them about the legal awareness in the community. So this will awaken some of the pimps, some of the traffickers, because there's a other person who is demanding, but the people who are being used sometimes are also exploited, and they turn out to be a trafficker. So if we tell them about the drugs, because in Nepal some of the boys are being used to carry the drugs from one place to another, especially to China. So all this awareness, giving them the real story, telling them about what happens inside the brothels, how many times they're being raped, what happens. So all these things will definitely create an awareness. And then encouraging the community to own their own community. And that has happened. That has really happened in our country. It has really worked well. So I'm sure it will work in future as well. So I think those are the things that we need to do. But at the same time, the system has to change. But who will change the system? That is a good question. Unless we ourselves get into the system and change the system, nobody can change the system. If we keep waiting, that's why it's better to go even in churches. If we are talking, we have to talk to the churches on career guidance. Like for us, when we went to the young group people, we have encouraged some of the young students who were so good in studies. They were going to, I'm not against theology college or anything like that, but some of the young students who were so good in studies, they said, oh, now I'm a Christian, so I will go to theology college, and then I will go to the village and I will evangelize. I said, God has given you wisdom. You have the power. You are good in education. You're good in studies. Why don't you become a lawyer? So that you can fight for the justice of those people who cannot speak up. So 3 of the people from our community over here had joined the law college, and now they are becoming the voice for the voiceless. So in churches, we can do this kind of awareness. What subject to study? We should just think of what can I gain, but what can I give to the community? What is the purpose of my life? I think those kind of awareness can also, because then who will speak up? Who will change the system if we don't go into the system? Who will change the corruption if we don't speak up for that? So I think we need to change ourselves first and be an example, encourage others, and be the role model, and then be the change in the community. I think that way we can. So we need to look at, as an organization, are we doing what are we supposed to do? Or are we just manipulating with the term anti-human trafficking? That's the question. Thank you so much.
The Philippines Interagency Council Against Trafficking director said that ending OSEC is a shared responsibility. The government alone cannot end these scourges. We will need the help of everyone to find a sustainable solution to this problem that affects every nation in the planet. OSEC is a growing global or transnational crime that requires ending impunity in both source and demand countries, said IJM's director. This horrific crime is often fueled by offenders in countries such as Australia, the US, Canada, the UK, and other European nations who pay to direct the sexual abuse of children. By passing a tougher law in this country, government will help ensure its justice system provides justice for survivors of OSEC. This is a justice issue. So how do we fight OSEC as churches in Asia? I think we need to decide to have intentional program to end OSEC among faith-based organizations and churches, and do collaborative efforts with other organizations who are doing successful work like IJM, Children's Rights Network, Save the Children, and more. Church leaders and children's advocates must lobby Congress and Senate in creating and passing tougher laws to protect children and prosecute criminals. We encourage CCA to produce directory of organizations with programs fighting OSEC and trafficking in persons for network and cooperation and collaboration. Holding regular consultations and forum among churches and other organizations will help raise the awareness of our constituencies about the increasing cases of OSEC. In the Philippines, we have an annual Freedom Forum where churches and other stakeholders gather to celebrate victories in fighting OSEC and plan for effective partnership among churches, NGOs, government agencies in charge of fighting OSEC. We still believe that we must continue to improve on these efforts, as we always highlight in our Freedom Forum: prevention, including addressing root causes and awareness raising. The prosecution part is very important, including investigation and adjudication, protection of victims, rights including assistance and compensation, and of course partnership with international organizations and other external partners. We need to expand our partners, our network, in order to fight OSEC, because human trafficking, the traffickers are strong and an organized crime. I am wearing black today because today is Thursday. Thursdays in black. Let us continue our shout. No to violence against women and children. No to rape of women and girls. Together, we can stop, and let us stop and eliminate OSEC.
And I think to end the so-called human trafficking, sexual exploitation, and also labor exploitation, it seems to be such a big and hard work, considering the fact that still out there, there is a supply for every demand. As long as there is a demand from countries, the cases will always occur. However, it doesn't mean that there is nothing we can do to solve this problem. So based on PGI service experiences, we are also committed to taking active participation using holistic advocacy approach of migrant workers in collaboration with number of related stakeholders, such as PGI members of churches, local and national governments, number of ministries, we name it here, Ministry of Social, Health Ministry, and Ministry of Women Empowerment and Children Protection, and also Minister of Foreign Affairs. And also, I think we should open our collaboration with local and international NGOs, such as IOM, UN Women, and other national level, also with local and international agencies and with faith-based organization. In our experience, we are also actively promote ratification of the anti-human trafficking law by working together with interfaith organization, including with the House of Parliament in Indonesia. For example, the effort of revising law number 39, year 2004, about placement and protection of Indonesian migrant workers, and also laws number 20, 2007, about the elimination of criminal act of human trafficking. In addition to that, we have done a number of training for mentors and facilitators for migrant workers in eastern and western part of Indonesia, including for multi-faith women participation to overcoming gender-based violence. And PGI continually undertaking 16 days of activism against gender-based violence campaigns since 2015. Also, since 2016, we have actively participated in organizing stakeholders meeting to map the networking institution and churches, including individuals having the same concern on human trafficking issue. In advocating this mission, we use international instruments such as CEDAW and Special Report of UN Committee on Migrant Workers. Other concrete action are performing multi-faith vigil for the victim of human trafficking. This aim is to build and maintain also collective memories for various tragedy experienced by migrant workers, and it is seen as a collective advocacy among the civil society. And to answer the possibility for our organization to evolve a common strategy, I think first and foremost is building ecumenical partnership and relationship among civil society organization and also among churches. The model of partnership is multilateral and inclusive. It should be inclusive, and it is expressed in the form of collective advocacy, public witness, and also networking dissemination of partners and institutions sharing a common interest and concern. We also have conducted some dissemination session and discussion about violence prevention model for migrant workers, which is considered as a guidance for mentors and facilitator. We also established warning system as a community watch, we call it, to intensify community participation in preventing migrant workers syndicates and to raise awareness of the danger of human trafficking. We also have a mapping and organize a roadmap for human trafficking prevention. We call for active roles for media in other situation to improve the capacity for the journalists in preventing news which is with non-victim blaming approach. They are also training for local champions such as for local pastors or community leader in shelter management in order to improve their service performance for helping women and children in need. From all the moves we have done so far, I think there is possibilities for PGI and also for us all to combat human trafficking in women and children if all the stakeholders working hand in hand, take action together and have same passion and compassion. Also build a mutual and equal partnership among cross regional, national, and local level.
During COVID, as we're still very much in COVID right now. So one of the good practices that we've seen across the region is really going out and training the frontline service providers, whoever they are. So in the Philippines, for example, we've been working really, really closely with the people who work in the quarantine centers. So all the migrants who have to stay in quarantine centers for considerable periods of time, and this happens in many countries, Myanmar, Thailand, Philippines, ensuring that the people who come who have daily relations, who have daily kind of interactions with the migrants, they know what to look out for and they know how to do referrals. It's also, we need to ensure that increasingly we get into that online space, whether it's in terms of information campaigns or counseling or psychosocial support, but that we are able to provide assistance to people where we cannot get there in person, because these mobility restrictions are likely to remain in place for some time. And we do see increasing usage of apps and technology in this. But of course, when we do that, we have to keep in mind that sometimes the most vulnerable do not even have access to mobile phones or smartphones. And so we still have to keep in mind, how do we reach out? You know, if we're talking about a domestic worker whose passport and phone has been taken away from her, you know, what is there left in terms of reaching out to that person? So yes, I think close collaboration with frontline services, training and changing a little bit the way we do awareness and outreach is really important right now. Thank you.
I think rehabilitation of victims of human trafficking is very important. Yeah, helping children rebuild their lives and dignity, you know, as person is very, very important. Rebuilding their human dignity, you know? And we do this by giving comprehensive counseling, you know, to children by giving psychosocial intervention, giving support, financial and moral support, and of course in education. Sending them to school is very, very important. Those victims of trafficking who were sent to school, those who were able to graduate in high school and college, they become successful persons, and they even become they also empower other victims after they graduate. No? So education is very important, and of course economic justice and empowerment. When people do not have economic, they don't have economic capability, we will again return to the problem of poverty. So the issue of trafficking will continue if we do not if we don't respond with our economic justice program. So the rehabilitation of victims should be dealt with a comprehensive approach. Yeah. So and also we need also to help victims look for legal assistance so that they can really file cases and have the perpetrators put to jail. So how can we help churches go over perpetrators? This is actually very, very hard, no, for us at churches. But we have to have our program first. We need to create a human trafficking committee or human trafficking desk in our churches and study what human trafficking is, how to combat trafficking, a lot of things about human trafficking, and going over perpetrators is the job of the police. Actually, no, it's not our. No, we will only help, but the job of going over the perpetrators is the job of governments. Now here in the Philippines, we help the victims, empower the victims, help in filing cases, but the prosecution is a legal work already, and prosecuting the survivors is actually going after the perpetrators is the job of our partners. No, it's the government's task. It's very hard, no, for us to be involved in prosecuting, because they have to undergo. They need to undergo legal cases. No, the usual legal process, and but we have a lot to contribute as a church, but we still but first we have to start first our ministry with victims of trafficking, our desk, our committee, in the local churches, in districts, or in the national level. If we have this office, then we can do a lot of things in helping the victims, survivors of trafficking.
Assuming the individuals or the person who asked this question is young and is interested to do something meaningful in her life, I think it would depend very much where you are. My suggestion, my very humble suggestion would be try and find a workers' rights organization in your place, wherever you are, an organization that looks at people as rights holders, as workers, and work with them and learn about the strength and the situation of the workers. And that's how you would learn from the ground, or whatever, it really depends on where you are. But I would say find an organization to volunteer, the organization which looks at people as rights holder and not as beneficiaries. So that would be my suggestion.
Members, this has been an enlightening conversation, discussion on this webinar. I believe we need to continue this and to ensure that our presenters, whoever they might be, have more time allocated for them to enable us to be empowered, to be informed better, and to be able to participate in a manner that enables all of us to ensure that this topic that we are discussing, it's overwhelming. It is absolutely overwhelming. I hear the frustration, I hear the anger alongside the passion and the compassion and the work that has been carried out by so many people. I've heard people talk about advocacy, about mobilizing people, about mobilizing governments, about ongoing economic development, ensuring that we've got sufficient support in place in our communities, in our churches, sufficient resources, also developing political strategies to eliminate sex trafficking of women and girls, and dare I say also young boys. Also need to ensure that we continue to strengthen our communities. Dr. Mathews, I ask you please, as the Vice Moderator, for us to look seriously at having another webinar of this kind, and hopefully that we can have it for much longer so that we can engage at a deeper level and share the stories, share the concerns. So to all our presenters and to our participants, to those of you who are listening in and watching from all over the world, thank you, thank you, thank you very much. May the Lord bless you and keep you all. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you all peace. And may God be gracious unto us, strengthen the work in this area, in our faith communities, our churches, and the people that we serve. In Jesus' name, amen.